And monster is an amalgam of predator. And you might say, well, there's no such thing as a dragon. It's like, yes, there is. It's just a loose category. What's common across all predators equals dragon. It's not like they're not real. They're hyper real. They're more real than the phenomena themselves.
I think we're good to go. We're ready to start? Mm-hmm. Alright, sweet. Alright, I'm Patrick.
And I'm Clifford.
Sweet, Clifford. We are here today to do a special about the thing that this whole book has revolved around.
A ring? A hobbit?
No.
A dragon?
Oh shoot. Well, it has revolved around a hobbit, but yeah, we're doing dragons today.
I was being facetious. If you need a more monumental... A dragon?
I'll probably leave both in. We'll see. So anyways, yeah. So obviously we've been going chapter by chapter throughout this thing, but I kind of just figured, like we had fun really diving into the background of elves. We did it with, what else we do it with?
Yeah, goblins to an extent, dwarves a little bit. I think any time we get to pull from historical references and influences that Tolkien would have seen and would not have seen, it's always interesting.
Yeah, so we wanted to do the same with dragons, obviously, but just looking at all the topics we'd have to talk about in each chapter, unless we wanted to have one really long episode for one of these chapters, we figured, why don't we just do a special just all about dragons, like the whole history and everything, the myths of them all leading up to Tolkien, and then we can see how that kind of influenced his work.
Mm-hmm.
So
certainly.
So that's what we're going to do here. Strap in. This is going to be a long one because, it's a special. Like, this is a special thing that we're doing for you. So we don't really care how long it takes. Or I don't care how long it takes. Clifford might. So, no Cliff's Notes today. But let's just jump right into it with, how should we say this? Like, do we have like do humans have some sort of like biological fear of dragons or reptiles or something, do you think?
Interesting. I don't know. It's as we'll get to some various examples throughout this episode. We have there's very strong traditions dealing with dragons and related creatures all over the world, and I personally feel like those traditions have a fairly strong influence on how we see the world. Like I think for a lot of European cultures, dragons are inherently kind of scary, fire and fury, and so they have that connotation. What do you think?
I think there's something to it. Like just reptiles in general. I mean, reptiles are creepy, and I mean, I feel like that's kind of there's probably a purpose for that. Just going back, like, well, yeah, snakes should creep us out because snakes are like predators and. We don't want them like in our house or where we live, or when we're walking through tall grass or something, we're gonna be freaked out when we see them. So I mean,
so you're saying we have we've got a built-in resistance to reptiles,
So or
snakes specifically.
Yeah, so I was trying to look up some actual research to back that up, and so what I found was. There was a study showing that 6-month-old babies, they react with more stress based on their pupils changing. I guess that's either I don't know. It was scientific how they're measuring it. But anyways, when they see pictures of snakes and spiders, they get more scared. So that makes people think like, yeah, maybe it is hardwired into us that we're supposed to be scared of, the classically scary animals. out there, like snakes and
Which
spiders.
would make sense. Like you're saying, there's a functional basis for that.
But it doesn't quite make sense because, you know, there's some people that want snakes as pets and like love snakes and sleep with them and stuff. So it's like, well, how do you explain those? So,
Sure, but think there's plenty of people who do like basically things that go counter to their basic survival instincts because of the thrill or whatever it is. Like, you know, people who go rock climbing that by default is not necessarily something that's going to help you survive. Like engaging in something that's a little bit risky, I think, does have its rewards for people beyond like a basic survival functionality. So I could see that as a way, an explanation around having an instinctual resistance to something like a snake, but still wanting one as a pet.
yeah. Now the other thing that they've said is they've proved that it's very easy to condition people to be afraid of snakes, as opposed to condition people to be afraid of something cute and cuddly. You know?
Interesting.
Yeah. So if we're not like totally born with it, we can learn it easily, as opposed to learning to fear other things as easily. So that's kind of interesting.
Well, I have two things I want to talk about in response to that. One of them I think I'll come back to at the end of the episode, but one would be, I see that as a little bit of like, the more different something is from a human, the more different it is from yourself, the more I think people, even if they're babies, inherently recognize that difference. So things like reptiles and fish are much more different from mammals, or much more different from humans than other mammals are. So by default, mammals are a little bit more relatable and cozier, cuter, etc. Whereas it's very difficult for us to find a fish or a reptile cute, you know. And then birds are kind of on the border there. Meanwhile, what I want to get to at the end of the episode is like, maybe it's not quite the topic for this episode. You know, they found people, when you start getting into all this weird like voice stuff that people have in their houses, anything that has a human characteristic, that inherently makes it more relatable. So robots that have human voices, like an Apple Home or whatever it is, or Siri, people actually find more relatable, even if they acknowledge that it's not a living thing, than they would a fish or something like that. You know, they might say, okay, my dog's more relatable than a robot, but the robot inherently has some qualities that I like. You have an emotional connection to something when it speaks your language and has a voice that you understand. And that, I think, might tie into what we see in The Hobbit a little bit.
Yeah.
It's an interesting twist to a lot of this dragon mythology. But we'll get back to that.
Yeah, I think you're skipping ahead there, but that's a good idea.
I am. On the first point, though, what I was getting at is the difference, the differentness can be scary, but it can also be a sign of power or something like that, or a power differential.
Okay. Yeah.
And I'm going to put forward a hypothesis that for some cultures and sometimes this power differential is seen as a bad thing, like the power is threatening. So you can take that as like a negative energy, but you can also kind of skew the same power to just signify that something is kind of holy or above us, or just generally like beyond humans and our understanding or something like that. It becomes sort of mystical. So I think fear plays into it, but it also comes back around to like mysticism and the creation of what we believe in. And so, anyways, I'll jump in with more thoughts on that as we get through here.
Okay. I don't really know how to touch that.
Let's keep rolling, and I'll butt in occasionally.
Okay. All right. Well, so have you heard of the? He's pretty popular now. The Jordan Peterson.
I have.
Okay.
I can't say that I had listened to anything of his before today or before researching this episode, but I have heard of him.
Yeah. He's I guess he's a political figure now at this point, but that's not the part that we're interested in because we're above that on this show. But anyways, the cooler thing that he does is he studies all sorts of myths, but he's like a psychologist, and so he approaches myths from all cultures and basically like analyzes them to see like how that helps humans like function or survive or yeah, I don't know. You kind of get what I'm getting at. Audience, do you get what I'm getting at? Yeah. Okay. So anyways, so obviously, if he's doing myths, he's going to come across dragons at some point. So he spent a lot of time thinking about dragons, reading up on dragons. And so I was listening to some of his stuff on YouTube that he has, because that's kind of addicting. But but he was saying the human's fear of dragons goes back 60 million years to when we were still just primates, like monkeys dwelling in trees, basically. Which is kind of nuts. So, because he was saying a dragon is basically the sum of all predators that these tree-dwelling people would have had to worry about. Because it's like the combination of some really big cat, or a snake, or a raptor / bird or something attacking it. Which is so it's like, so if you look at a dragon, it's got usually paws and is usually kind of swift. So like, okay, so that's like the cat part. Yeah, I can see that. And then it's reptilian like a snake, and lots of times they're really long and slithery. Like they almost call them like sometimes they call them worms and stuff. And then obviously it's got the wings too. And then this was the coolest part of it, in my opinion, was it breathes fire. Most dragons breathe fire. And so he thinks that comes in because like, well, on top of all that scary stuff of like everything that could possibly attack you, then there's always like the danger of fire, and like that's always there's always the danger of fire with it too. So then you throw that into the mix too, and so now you got basically the ultimate unknown predator, for your
You're saying it's like a primitive boogie monster type thing.
Yeah, and it's just a one thing catch all kind of,
Okay, interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it.
Yeah, like it's almost lazy. It's just like, that's what I'm really scared of. I don't have to get specific. Like it's the cat or it's the snake this time. It's just like there's just one. There's
put the
one
monsters
big thing
in a blender.
Yeah, like low resolution was a good word.
This is what you get.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm pretty intrigued by that.
I know, right? Yeah.
I agree with some of that, but I think like a lot of these mythologies, dragons are pretty well flushed out. Like they're much more specific than I would expect if it was so general. Like I would say that those are some of the reasons that they've like people kind of latch on to some of these myths, but I think there's something more to it because there's like a recurrent typology of what dragons are, what they look like, what they do, and it varies, but it's like it's a specific idea.
Well, there's also the idea too that goes with it. What are they always guarding? They're either guarding like a maiden or it's gold, which is what like the hero would want. And so with their association with hoards of gold or as captors of beautiful women, dragons can represent opportunity through risk too. So it's like, well, this is the sum of all our fears. This is what has to be defeated, and it's guarding what we want most too. So that element's playing into it as well. But yeah, then as you go, each myth, and then as civilization gets more complex, they add more details to it and they get fleshed out like what you're saying. But just at the very root of all of it, those are pretty common elements for almost every dragon myth that we're going to see.
Well, I will beg to differ. I think let's dive into some of these myths because I think the differences between them will be pretty interesting.
Now the representation of the dragon is more complex than mere monster, because the mythological dragon also is the thing that hoards treasure, and I really like that symbol. I think that's also why it will never go away. It's such a great symbol because it says, well, the unknown can take you down. It can bite you with its fiery breath like a poisonous snake, and it can burn things like fire, and it's an aerial predator that can take you from the air, and it's a carnivorous predator that can take you from the ground, and it's reptilian. It's the sort of thing that can pull you down into the water. And it's easy to see that as an amalgam of the threats that have been laid forth for human beings since the beginning of time. And monster is an amalgam of predator. and you might say, well, there's no such thing as a dragon. It's like, yes, there is. It's just a loose category. What's common across all predators equals dragon. It's not like they're not real. They're hyper real. They're more real than the phenomena themselves, just like an abstraction can be more real than the phenomena themselves. And then the canonical dragon for human beings isn't just a predator. We're not rabbits. You could imagine that the dragon for a rabbit is just a dragon. There's no damn treasure there at all. But for human beings, it's ambivalent, because the thing that you don't know about is also the thing that holds the greatest gift. And why is that? It's because the unrealized world manifests itself when you make an error. And the unrealized world is something that can take you down, obviously, but it's also the source of all new information.
Part of the world, or what set of myths would you like to touch on first?
So I was thinking we go just, we'll skim through the Bible real quick, because that's
interesting. Okay.
It's pretty ancient text, right? You know, it comes from kind of the middle of the world, so like it could get influenced by either side, or it could influence either side, like whether east or west.
Okay.
So yeah, so we're just going to brush over like a couple things here that are in there. So in the Old Testament, there's this beast that they keep referencing called the Leviathan. And so apparently it's just this massive sea monster. And it's reptilian, so it's some sort of dragon that kind of causes like the waves of the sea is what they say. And then they're saying like it's the primordial sea monster that can't be defeated. And so now this is in the Old Testament, so this would be like the Israelites or Hebrews, or like it's that old, so like it's probably even before like they were just specifically Jews, you know. I don't know how well you know history, but yeah. So it's that old that it was probably influenced by like the Canaanite people that were there before, because they had a same kind of monster, or it was like the Babylonian people where they eventually got exiled to, because they have a monster, dragon kind of monster like that too. So that's possibly where it comes from. But anyways, and
but
that
key features there: bigness.
And like, yeah, just big, causes like destruction, like all the waves and everything. And then like it's just like almost impossible, or it is impossible to even defeat. You can't even do it, you know. And like you can't really wrap your head around its size almost even. And
so here's an example where kind of what I was saying earlier. It's something that's sort of unknown and scary and dangerous, but it can easily be represented as just a powerful force, you know, like people could choose to respect it or make sacrifices or pay homage to this Leviathan because it's very powerful. It has kind of almost godlike powers. If it's moving the waves, it's moving the ocean. Those are things that in some places that's attributed to a god or a spirit that's controlling these like forces of nature. Okay. And I would say in the same way, like let's say Greek mythology or something, gods that are even considered generally good can still be responsible for killing people and are still dangerous just because they're powerful. So
yeah, but who's treating this Leviathan guy like a god? I don't get it.
I'm not saying necessarily that anyone's worshiping it, but the fact that it's kind of this like mystical or mythical creature that's so powerful and is literally making waves indicates to me that there's it's kind of an unknown or unseen force in the world that's responsible for things that people interact with, like the waves. So like natural phenomena get attributed to it.
Well, yeah, no.
It has a power that's very influential.
Yeah, but I think that's still what Peterson was saying. Like, he's basically going to make, like, I'll probably have already played a clip by now, but he's going to make the point, like, they're hyper real. So, like, the sum of all predatory things is this dragon, you know?
Okay.
So like, you know, you then you can specify out, like, oh, it's their explanation for waves, I think is what you're saying, right?
Yeah, to an extent, yeah.
Or like it's the explanation for why there's storms or like something evil.
I'm saying in part that his Peterson's justification is based on fear. Like it's the danger of the thing, it's what's scary, and therefore like that creates
fear because it's unknown, I think is what he's getting.
Yes. At. Yeah. And I'm getting at the taking some of those same causes or same influences, and like that the power of something might also lead to the creation of a myth, not necessarily just the fear.
Well, what's its power, or where does it get its power?
The power to kill in some of his examples, but then in some of these other ones, like Leviathan, the power to move the oceans.
Yeah, I don't know, but like when you see Leviathan, they're always scared of it, and they can't like wrap their head around it or get a hold of it.
Right. No, okay. I think we're pretty much on the same page. I just wanted to basically try to expand beyond his argument that it's a purely fear-based thing, and say that I think there's an element of like awe and yeah, basically like awe of power that comes with something being unknown and possibly dangerous.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Just like honestly, there's been like 3 times where I've been editing the episodes later, and I'm listening to it, and I'm just like, Patrick, why can't you understand what Clifford's saying here? And sometimes it's because like I have my own agenda of what I'm trying to bring up, and I'm trying to talk with you and like figure it out, but then I'm like, Patrick, you just didn't get this. And so now I'm trying to like actually question you here, because like, all right, let me make sure we're on the same page. Because there's just like sometimes like it seems like sometimes we have conversations and you just go over my head. And like I don't even notice it.
Likewise sometimes.
Hey, so this is an edit in after the fact. But yeah, what Clifford's talking about is sometimes dragons they're used as an explanation to why natural phenomena would happen, like a bunch of waves or like a tsunami hits or something like that, or some sort of world like weather cycle or pattern like that. That's what I'm getting at, because this was one of the classic cases where I wasn't quite on the same page with him. So just clearing that up now. We'll get into this more later in the episode too. All right.
So moving on. So we've got Leviathan early on in the Bible. What else happens?
Well, so then there's the famous one. There's a dragon in the Book of Revelation too, and so that one's a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 diadems on its head. So that dragon, it's clearly a symbol of Satan. It's that's a symbol. It's like a symbol of like spiritual warfare too, because like that. The scenes it's in are, I don't know, I don't want to get into like that book because it's hard to, I don't know, that's beyond the scope of the show, like what the books actually say. But anyways, Leviathan and Revelation, they both are basically, they're symbols of the Satan, who's like, Satan means the enemy or the adversary. So, every single time these dragons here, like what we were saying, they represent the, maybe not fear, but like the unknown or like the enemy of, and kind of predator, but I mean, it's just, they represent like the ultimate evil and like the sum of all, everything bad in the world. So, and then, with the Bible, obviously, who's going to conquer these? Well, it's predicted that Leviathan will be the entree served at the Messianic banquet, so that's when like the Messiah comes. And then if you're looking at Revelation, who ends up defeating it but Christ, obviously. So
that's pretty interesting. That's such a specific prediction that it's being served as the Leviathan is being served as an entree.
Yeah, I don't know. I think
at the banquet.
Yeah, I don't know exactly where I got that, but I've heard that in like multiple places, so I went with it. I was like, all right, we'll throw that on.
I certainly believe it. I find it kind of funny compared to like the broad sweeping, Christ will destroy the Leviathan when he arrives type thing, versus this creature will be eaten.
Then for Christians and Jews too, but it's God and. Christians, it's Christ who is God, but that defeats all evil. So, like, that's always, Satan's always there, but then it's always the ultimate good that's going to conquer him. Which is, it's kind of interesting.
And so I guess going off that, because it'll tie in later, is like, by their nature, dragons have to be kind of diametrically opposed. Like, they have to be associated with Satan, right?
Yeah.
Like, I would say in general, like, the structure of, like, the Christian and Jewish faith would kind of imply that you have it's, I don't know what the right word is, not divided, but things are typically split between good and evil. It's like a very dualistic understanding. So dragons kind of have to fall into that system somewhere, right?
Dragons might be the ultimate unknown chaotic force. And so then Christianity takes and it's like, yeah, this is like the source of evil. So like they're the good, or they're not the source. They're the symbol of the most evil ever, which is Satan, who's enemy, accuser, deceiver. Just muddles everything up, ruins everything, destroys stuff. Yeah, interesting.
Certainly.
We wanted to do kind of just walk through some dragons from all sorts of eras and places of the world. So then we were thinking, all right, next we'll get let's just get a classic dragon story from like medieval times. Now we're gonna do the Anglo-Saxon and Norse ones later. But so now we were thinking, all right, what about Western Mediterranean? I was looking at some examples, and I was immediately drawn to the Welsh dragon. The dragon that's on the flag of Wales. Mm-hmm. If you haven't seen the flag of Wales, it's really cool. Look it up. It's got a big red dragon on it.
Where does that dragon come from?
Yeah, see, that's why we're not going to actually do it. They're like, we think it came from like some Roman soldiers' banners or something when they were leaving. I don't know, but there wasn't much definitive stuff on it. So, anyways, the next big one that I thought was, there's always the story of St. George and the dragon, and so I was like, why don't we finally get down to this? Because I know the real St. George was just a Roman soldier.
Okay. Interesting.
So where are we getting this huge like dragon thing? Like I was always confused by that when I was a kid, because it's like, wait, how are you a saint if you defeated a dragon? Because dragons aren't real, or they're like physically real, So I didn't understand that. But
I will say, Saint George of the Dragon is a pretty common story. Like, it comes up a lot in artwork.
Yeah.
Throughout multiple ages, some of which we've talked about on the show. And I think all over Europe and like European diaspora, St. George and the Dragon gets represented and like recurs in a lot of different ways. Like, I was thinking in one of the public squares in Stockholm where I studied abroad, there's like a massive, beautiful sculpture of St. George slaying the dragon.
Clifford, I think you're jumping ahead. We're gonna do that part after we tell the story about it.
Okay. I'm trying to get people excited about St. George, even if they're like, I don't know who St. George is.
Yeah,
like,
okay.
All
right, well, anyways,
the story's a big deal.
Yeah, let's be linear about these things. So the real St. George was a Roman soldier, and maybe he was directly like a bodyguard for the Emperor Diocletian. But anyways, he was under Diocletian's rule. And he was like the first emperor, or he was an emperor that did like a huge Christian-wide persecution, like the real famous ones that you hear about. Mm-hmm. Like his was probably the most famous. And so St. George was a Roman soldier, but he was a Christian. And so then they said, give up your Christian faith, like just renounce it. Like that's all you have to do. And he said no. And then they ended up martyring him, which means they killed him because he was a Christian. And that common story, lots of people converted because of his example.
Right.
But anyways, there's no dragon in that. And so other saints that are associated with dragons are Saint Theodore, Saint Sylvester, Saint Margaret and Martha, and then of course there's Saint Michael because of the Book of Revelation and Book of Daniel. I don't know. He's fighting like the symbolic Satan there and like kicking him out of heaven. But anyways, that Saint Theodore was the main one from the 7th century. Saint Theodore of Amasea was the Dragon Slayer saint. He was the only one associated with dragons, and like even if you go to if you go to Venice, even which is pretty mainstream Western Europe, there if you look at St. Mark's Basilica, which is it Basilica or Cathedral? Whatever. It's the big cathedral that's in or Basilica. I think it's a Basilica.
Okay.
I don't know. Well,
I believe you.
Okay. Sorry if I got that wrong. It's the biggest one in town. And so, like, it's got art all over the sides of the walls and everything. And there's a picture of St. Theodore fighting a dragon there. So that was the original thing. So there's no story of St. George killing a dragon mentioned until the 11th century. And before that, he was only venerated as the soldier martyr that I was just saying. But then eventually, around then, St. Theodore and St. George are pictured together, each slaying their own dragons. And, yeah. So, let's see. So
the two stories get blurred together.
Yeah. The first text, and you can see that St. George was also from Turkey, or modern-day Turkey. It was called it's a region called Cappadocia. Yeah. So let's see. The first texts related to the episode date back to the 11th century, include all elements that we know today. The lake monster. All right. Yeah. I'm gonna not say that part. Okay. So, anyways, there's a pretty common story. The St. George and the Dragon story then around that time develops, and it develops. It's recorded in. I think the first recording that we have is in the Golden Legend, which is like. I think it seems like it's the first version of like the lives of the saints, so it's like quick stories, bios on all the saints and like their lives, and that came out in 1260 in Genoa, and it was by Jacobus de Vorengine.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyways, the story in there is only 8 paragraphs long. The first 3 are the dragon story, and then the last 5 are his martyrdom. All right. So. We're going to take this time, too, to just comment on just how, I'll paraphrase the story here first. Basically, but my version's, like, not much shorter than the real thing. It's just colloquially worded for us, basically. Yeah. So anyways, here's the story. St. George, knight born in Cappadocia. He went to Libya. So, all right, so we went from Turkey, he went to Libya. And so this is, like, during... We can still assume like Roman era times, and so so Rome owned all that land at this point, so he could probably easily do that. So he's in Libya, which is like west of Egypt, but on the top of Africa, next to the Mediterranean. All right, so good. Okay, so he goes to the town of Silene. Yeah, he's Silene. Okay, which has a pond like a sea, wherein there was a dragon that snared the whole country. People tried but chickened out to defeat it, and now to appease it, they 2 sheep every day. If they screwed up, they had to take a man in the place of one of its sheep. So eventually, they started casting lots. Casting lots is betting, taking bets. I think we know what casting lots is. All right, yeah. So they started casting lots about which kids and young people they should sacrifice to the dragon. Then eventually, and they would go and do that, and like
so it gets vicious pretty fast.
Right, yeah. So they're sacrificing their kids to appease this dragon, basically. Then finally, the lottery, like the casting lots, it falls that the king's daughter is going to be next. And so then the king wrote, "For the love of the gods, take gold and silver and all that I have, and let me have my daughter." But the peasants were like, no. You made the laws here, buddy. Like, we've all lost our kids. Now it's your turn. Or else we're going to kick you out from being king. Like, we're not going to stand for that. So then the king got to spend a couple last days with his daughter. Then he blessed her, and then he led her over to the dragon. So while they're walking over there, St. George is walking, and he sees her. But she tells him to leave unless he wants to die too. But George says, because, we got to remember, this is 11th century is when we're getting this story. So this is like the peak of, like, chivalrous knights. Right? All right, even though, this story is supposed to take place in Roman times, I think that's what they think.
Right, they have a creative historical imagination.
Yeah, so St. George says he'll help her in the name of Jesus Christ. This is lies of the saints. This is...
right.
All right. While speaking, the dragon runs... So while they're speaking, the dragon runs towards him. St. George, on his horse, takes out his sword, not a spear. Takes out his sword and makes a sign of the cross. Okay. He rode heartily towards the dragon, and smote him with his spear, and hurt him sore, and threw him into the ground. Okay, so it was weird that it said he took out his sword, but then he smote him with his spear. That was just that. I don't know if that's important, but I was just reading that because I was like, wait, he takes out a sword, but I'm like, every single picture has a spear. So apparently he speared the dragon. But this
maybe,
3 paragraph.
Maybe as a Roman warrior, he's got both on him. He's like holding a spear and a sword at his hip.
Yeah, but why? Yeah, whatever.
It doesn't make that much sense to me. I will say I love in the old stories when we get to use the word smote.
Yeah, dude. We're doing a Lord of the Rings podcast. We're going to use even more fun words once you get to Lord of the Rings.
All right.
All right. So, St. George pins it, doesn't kill it right away. So he's put the spear in it, but it's not dead yet. So he pins it down, ties it up, and then him and the princess walk it into the city. And George says he's going to baptize everybody in the name of Jesus Christ. Then he'll kill the dragon, which he does. And so once everybody's baptized, he chops off the dragon's head. All right. Okay. So the story goes on to say 15,000 men were baptized. King builds a church, offers George a bunch of money, but George refuses it. Says it should be given to the poor for God's sake. Obviously, this is like just straight saint propaganda stuff here.
Yeah. Of course.
I mean, it's just like this is just so typical. St. George charged the king 4 things: take care of the church, honor priests, have pity on the poor. Then he kissed him. What's
the 4th thing?
I know, right? So I took notes. I took good notes, but I didn't see a 4th thing either. All right, and then the persecution story starts, and they have it be under basically provincial governor as opposed to Diocletian himself. But the persecution story is even longer. So we could go. So first of all, I think it's important to note. I just said the whole story. I said it pretty quick, but it's not much longer than what I just said. So, this story was written... our version's from Genoa in Italy. Mm-hmm. The original version would have come out of the Middle East with Crusaders, which we'll talk about in a little bit more. But then before that, the story would have just been probably some sort of oral tradition. Maybe it was about Theodore before it was even about George. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of interesting that we basically just get the bare bones of what's left. It's like it's filtered and sifted down into just the essential details of the story.
Right.
And that's very common with all myths, honestly, most of them. Especially the older they are, the more so that happens. Mm-hmm. And so now, you can kind of look at the story as a Christian propaganda story and a good story about a saint, which I like to do. Mm-hmm. But then you can also look at it too, and you can say, all right, we noticed that the king said, "For the love of the gods," when they were talking about sacrificing his daughter. So it's okay, so this was a pagan town. So then now we know the dragons. It's are they physically real? No. Did they believe that they were at the time? I'm not quite sure myself. I got.
You mean the people in the town, or the people writing this story?
The people writing the story, or the people that passed down the story. Anyways, what we can say though is whether they thought the dragon was real or just a symbol of something, I don't know. They probably thought it was, I don't know, kind of. It probably was both. Yeah, it was probably both for them.
My guess is it's a little bit of both. It's a question of how conscious were they of this thing is a symbol,
Yeah, but that's almost not even as important because it's just okay. So the dragon, we can look at it now with that analyzing it and say. The dragons is probably a symbol of a real problem for this town. Whether the town believed that there actually was a dragon or something. It was such a problem that it's okay, we're going to sacrifice our kids to this thing. I don't know what it is, but it's that's a pretty serious problem if you're, you're going to sacrifice kids and everything. So then this great saint comes along and defeats the dragon, and the story makes very clear using the power of Christ, and he brings the city to believe in them. So again, again in the Western Christian tradition, this is Christ defeating the ultimate evil, or the sum of fears, or the sum of all the problems, or all the chaos of the town.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting because if you try to think of what the people writing this story, how what sort of metaphor they saw this as, or what they were trying to capture when they were writing the story. It's certainly they're very interested in the heroism of it, right?
Well, yeah, they might have believed it too, but they obviously also thought, even if they fully believed it, they probably fully believed in the symbolism of it too.
Certainly, they want to tell the story for the sake of spreading the word, educating people, what have you. I mean, a lot of the same reason people still tell stories.
Right.
and it's entertaining, or certainly was entertaining at the time. So yeah, it's like what are they trying to get out of it necessarily? I would say it confuses me. I don't really know what they thought about the dragon. If you look at it one way, it's like this is something that's a problem for the town, taking away children. It's like a plague, sort of. Like I said, something bad has befallen the town, unspecified what it is, and it's hitting them where it's near, they're like nearest and dearest to their hearts. So it's a very painful and personal plague of sorts.
There was the detail there too early on in the story that said like, well, the people tried to defeat the dragon, but let me see, what did I write? The people tried but chickened out to defeat it. Yeah, so they tried to overcome this dragon, but they couldn't. So like whatever this problem was, they tried to, and it's probably like on them. It's like honestly, I personally think like whatever this problem with the town is, the people were the cause of it themselves, as opposed to like some sort of like
perhaps
famine or plague or something.
Perhaps. So it's like certainly them appeasing the dragon is like, whether you could say that's their fault or it's them failing to take a stand, but that's clearly not being cast in a good light, which I'd say that's an interesting thing by itself. Like the concept of appeasement coming up again throughout Western literature is like a pretty bad thing,
Yeah.
Like appeasement's a recurring theme, and like even all the way through to World War II and stuff since then. People have a very negative, like a morally, like very completely negative view of appeasement.
Yeah, because you don't want to cooperate.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you would never bend at all to the evil thing, basically. And if you do, it's a sign of weakness, which we often take to be like a kind of standard truth. But I would say that that's something that's sort of embedded in our culture that we might take for granted, that comes out of some of these old stories. So there's the aspect of appeasement, and then I'm intrigued by the singular nature of it. Like the townspeople can't take on the dragon, so St. George steps up to the plate. And obviously part of that is that he's a converted Christian and the townspeople are not. So it's spreading the message, like he gets his strength from his religion. The townspeople who are pagan or believe in Roman gods or pre-Christian gods, what have you, do not yet have the strength to take on the dragon. And then he's a singular hero who wants no reward for himself. So he's selfless, but it's very much about his identity. It's not a communal thing by any means. He rescues the town. He saves the princess and the people, which, like you said, fits nicely into the time that they're writing this. They're kind of what they've created with knights and chivalry. Like that goes perfectly hand in hand with like the types of people that they're trying to create. But it's very, very, I mean, it obviously would be very different from a story that's produced much more recently, where we probably have like a little bit of a broader range of characters, or like more of a communal goal to the story.
Yeah, I mean, our stories are just kind of like, I don't know, like they're more, it's, you can get a more complex story now, just almost truly because like it's so easy to write stuff down. You don't even have to physically write something. You could just type it. I mean, like everything was a resource back then. Like being able to read was like a privilege. Being able to write was a privilege.
Certainly,
being able to have materials to write was a privilege.
Certainly, that's actually another interesting angle that I would bring in when we're talking about these biblical stories. Is like kind of as you were mentioning with the paintings on the walls of the church in Venice. A lot of Christian, as in other religions, a lot of Christian mythology and history is passed down through images to people in the church. That's kind of the fundamental reason that churches are so filled with paintings and stained glass and frescoes and carvings. Because most of the people of the church for a long time were illiterate. A lot of them couldn't understand Latin, which is the language the masses were held. So a huge part of that tradition was visual. And dragons are a very distinctly visual thing that could be a good way to kind of make a picture out of an evil thing that's happening to the town that maybe in the original language might have been kind of vague. And then when someone went to make an image, if they have to kind of make 4 windows that describe exactly what happened, the dragon is their representation.
That kind of links us back to how the St. George cult kind of would have spread across all of Europe, because like it just boomed across. Like once the stories started popping up, like they got everywhere in Europe.
People really liked it. It was a blockbuster.
Yeah, so this was from one of the sources I had. The story of St. George and the Dragon was spreading over, but it would have remained linked to eastern regions for a long time if the Crusades would not have taken place. Christians easily identified with a triumphant saint that had liberated the region from infidels. As patron saint of Crusaders, no one was more appropriate than George. So before the Crusade started, he was already like the soldier saint already, because he was a soldier. So they had already made him the patron saint of Crusaders. So there was that.
So he already has maybe a more militaristic association than some of the other saints who might be more inherently peaceful, and the dragon myth could be a way to sort of bend that militarism into a holy purpose.
Yeah, and then there's one more thing here. But the saint could have been so successful among pilgrim soldiers for another element. They saw it in Byzantium, so Constantinople, which is like the last... it's like the furthest east western town of Europe, basically. Big town. Yeah, it's modern-day Istanbul. A large painting showing a sovereign spearing a dragon, treading on it. This image was in front of the vestibule of the imperial palace and represented Emperor Constantine, who founded Constantinople, triumphant over the tyranny of the ungodly, the symbol of which was a dragon snake. This image was very popular in ancient times, and it is possible that Crusaders had seen a copy of it, later superimposed onto the symbol of the dragon slayer saint instead of Constantine.
Okay.
Yeah.
So was Constantine Christian?
Yeah, he was the one that converted the Roman Empire to Christianity.
Okay,
yeah.
So this is another kind of blending of myths, like the conversion myth and the representation of the ungodly, and these get woven together into a story.
Yeah, so it sounds like it comes from a famous picture that was in the Imperial Palace, which would be like seeing a big picture in the White House for us today.
Right. Well, yeah, but significantly more powerful because, the amount of like images and words we would come across in our lives would be pretty limited compared to what we see now on an average day, just looking at our phones or something. So the importance of a single painting would be huge for some people at that time.
Yeah, and. So from there, though, the cult of St. George spread very quickly. The first known images in England are from the 12th century. In the East, the monster looked more like a snake, but what the Crusaders brought back added paws and wings, and so it looks like the dragon that we all know. Kind of
interesting.
And then last thing on England is, do you know? All right, so like the British, like UK Union Jack flag with like the red, white, and blue and everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, but you know just the English flag? Do you know what that one is?
It's just a red cross, right?
Yeah, and so that's called the Cross of St. George. Oh. And so like that would have formed from like this time is when they would have gotten that.
Okay. Very interesting.
And I don't really know what actually, I don't know. Yeah, it came from then.
Okay.
And they probably got it from Genoa, who they were trying to have like trade partners with. And yeah. So I don't know, all kind of interesting there. See how it spreads out like that, but
certainly.
Should we turn our attention to something different?
Yeah. Yeah, so this is probably the biggest contrast to most of the stories that we're talking about throughout this episode is like the whole series of dragon myths throughout Eastern cultures, like East Asia specifically. Well, first of all, it's an interesting comparison because on the one hand, there's a lot of similarities. We see like recurrent themes with dragons. We recognize them as dragons. In modern pop culture, they've sort of blended together in a lot of ways. But then there's also some marked differences, and a lot of these come from religion and systems of belief and like how people are portraying fear and power and that type of thing in their regions. So I'd say the biggest contrast between the Western and Eurocentric stories we've been talking about throughout so far in the episode, and dragons of Chinese and other East Asian origin, is that generally the Eastern dragons are not viewed nearly so negatively. And this ties back a little bit to the point I was trying to make earlier about them like representing power, which can be bad, can be good, but it's not inherently evil. Like, evil is a very strong word. This is more of like, they're not quite playing the role that a god would, but they're like the spirit of a place. Some of the intriguing similarities that we'll see throughout, and we saw so far, is the association with water is very strong in the different Asian traditions. In general, most dragons are associated with water in some way. Like, a lot of them have their origins of kind of being people believing that they were a river spirit or somehow tied to the weather, typhoons, what have you. So they're kind of like a unspoken mystical power that does play a role in people's everyday lives. So it might be something that people build a temple to, make sacrifices to, in hopes that they will be benevolent. But of course, over time, like, people start to introduce other ways of looking at that. And notably, like, Buddhism helps introduce the concept of dragons being malicious, with the explanation that, you know, water and weather are very important to the health of your crops, etc. Life being good is necessary. You need water, but they can also be dangerous and cause devastation. So in the same way, dragons can be very helpful and beneficial and powerful and represent harmony, but they can also be very, very dangerous and destructive.
Do you think that kind of comes from, because we were talking about like in Christianity mostly, it's a pretty hard line good versus evil battle. Right. So dragons just represent the evil. They're always bad. Right. That's that. Whereas, so maybe they're not so much like maybe they're more associated with power and can kind of go both ways here because they don't have like ultimate evil bad guy.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's like there's like a pretty basic, maybe too basic for some people, but basic distinction that people make between Eastern and Western religion is that of the five major religions in the world, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam in the West, and Buddhism and Hinduism in the East, the Western religions tend to be dualistic and kind of very harsh in their distinctions between things. It's like an either or for a lot of situations, whereas Eastern religions tend to be both and. They're like a little bit more accommodating of multiple understandings of things and kind of blurring of lines between different characters and forces, what have you. They're a little bit more prone towards, I don't know that I would say conflicted, but like powers that are a little bit more complex than being good or evil. Like, it's hard to say dragons are inherently good or inherently evil in the Eastern cultures.
I don't know if you could totally say that though, because like in the East there's that famous yin and yang thing, you know. Mm-hmm. But then again, that kind of works together. But I think like that's like the ultimate dualism definition, as opposed to
but see, I would interpret that as like that represents a balance of power, and both the yin and the yang have different attributes. Like, for example, yang is considered to be masculine and yin feminine. So they're associated with different things. They balance each other out, but they're not necessarily at odds with each other. Like, one's not trying to triumph over the other. There's like a recognition that if I guess that's where I see the biggest difference is like they see it. There's a fundamental understanding that it's like if one thing
they coexist.
Yeah, exactly. If one thing were to destroy the other, the system would sort of break apart.
Right.
So to tie it back to dragons, we have across a whole series of different myths a very strong connection to water. Dragons are considered lucky on the whole. As we get into some more modern Chinese traditions, I'm sure most people know Chinese or dragons are one of the 12. It's part of the Chinese lunar calendar. It's one of the 12 years basically in the cycle. Incidentally, it's typically there are higher birth rates in the year of the dragon because it's a very desirable thing for your child to be a dragon. So yeah, it's for a lot of Chinese, in a lot of Chinese stories, and for a lot of Chinese people, dragons are just a symbol of power. And that's good. Like someone who's described as a dragon is like a real go-getter, like a success of a person. Interestingly enough, worms, and the language doesn't line up here. Like we'll get back to some of the language stuff when we're on some European stories, but worms are put at the other side of the spectrum. Like someone who's described as a worm is like a useless person who hasn't accomplished anything in their lives, basically. So
Okay.
they're on the total opposite ends of the spectrum. But some other interesting things is throughout these stories, dragons are represented. They're represented as multiple different animals. Like they take on all these different traits. So it's kind of like I see it as a blending of different animal forms with different like spirits, sort of. But in general, the final identity we get is like a chimera type creature, which actually has a lot of overlap with the European stories, where you've got something like this: the antlers of a deer, the claws of a hawk, paws of a tiger, snout of a pig. Some of those sound very weird off the top, but certainly most people have seen a lot of images of Asian or like Chinese, Japanese inspired dragons. They are typically considered like pretty masculine. We were mentioning the yin and the yang earlier. This gets maybe way off into a tangent, but the number 9 figures very prominently in with dragons. Like they have the features of 9 animals in one of the key myths. The dragon has 9 sons, the 9 sons of the dragon. Their scale, they always have 117 scales, which is a multiple of 9, of which 81 are yang, 36 are yin. The yang is are considered masculine, so the dragons are balanced, but in general they are more masculine, and the yang is associated with what's often described as the masculine power of generation, which could be seen as like the generation of a storm to produce rain or something like that, or something like much more sexual, like related to fertility. But anyways, I'm not going to dive into any specific myths because frankly, like I don't know that I have a very good one that's as concrete of a story. There's so many. And it's kind of broken up. It's like I'd say there are so many different stories about dragons. I don't know that I would have one that was very like distinctive or iconic. It's not quite a story, but one of the key myths is I don't know what you would call it. It's not really a myth, but like a traditional association with China seeing 4 directions around it and 4 seas. So there's a lake in Mongolia to the north, a lake to the west, the East China Sea and the South China Sea are these 4 bodies of water in 4 different directions. Each one has a color and each one has a dragon, and those dragons, or there is a dragon king that controls the 4 seas, and he kind of functions like a weather god. With a lot of this stuff is like I see like patterns, kind of like we were saying, like whether it's the number of scales or how it relates to geography, there's patterns at multiple levels of like how power works and what the things mean. But I will leave it at that for now. I think on the whole, the key takeaways are the like generally positive representation and the contrast that poses to most of the Western stories. I'll tie in one other little bit here. Coming more from Hinduism is something called Naga, who is basically a serpent or snake spirit, depending on where you're.
So does this mean India?
Yes, but it's complicated. Naga is a word from Sanskrit. I believe that it is he or she is a Hindu god as well, but the name Naga gets, because it's a simple word, gets recycled as both like a proper and improper noun. Is that the right word? Proper, improper noun? A proper noun and a regular noun.
Those are words.
Throughout, if
Okay.
you know what I mean. Like sometimes it's a name and sometimes it's just a descriptor. But these are very specifically snakes who are associated with the underworld, like guardians of the underworld in a lot of cases, and also in association with water, but also with caves and with treasure and gems. So they typically have a hoard of treasure that they're protecting. And this kind of mysteriousness is tied to basically strange things that humans don't totally understand in the underworld. So it's a little bit of a darker and more complicated twist to the Chinese dragons we were talking about earlier.
Did the Chinese dragons have treasure?
Not that I know of. There's sometimes pearls associated with them, but like hordes of treasure does not come up anywhere, as far as I can tell.
So Chinese dragons are just more associated with like elements and stuff?
Yeah, I'd say they're a little bit more like spiritual in nature. But yeah, so from Hindu, Sanskrit, Indian traditions, we get a lot more evidence and examples of dragons being associated with treasure, which comes up, as we will see, in a lot of the Western mythology.
Yeah, interesting. All right. Cool. You think we're ready to jump back to Anglo-Saxons then?
Yeah. Let's do it.
All right, so we're going to jump back to Norse stuff. You know, all right, so can't really relate East to Norse. Though, I don't know, it does seem more so like the biblical ones are in the middle, and then the further west you go, they become something else, and the further east you go, they become something different. And then, like, you know, the Indian one you're saying has treasure, and then these Western ones have treasure, but then the further off you go, the more different it becomes, which is kind of interesting note.
I will say, throughout it all, the connection, at least in almost everywhere, the connection to water surprised me. That's something I didn't really think of going into it. Like, I never think of dragons and water together. Like, I definitely think of fire first of all. But a lot of these examples, the dragons are almost like sea monsters or water spirits.
Well, it seems like the water's either like super violent, like sea monsters causing like rough wave storms, or it's just like completely cool, creepy pool thing, you know? Like,
perhaps.
Like a mirror or a mire, mirror. Isn't that just like a silent pool, like no waves, you know, just pan flat?
Like a mirror on your wall?
Yeah, but like MERE.
Oh, a mirror. Oh,
yeah. Come on,
like a bog.
Yeah, but not quite a bog, because like I think a mirror is just like it. You should be able to see your reflection, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. We're going back to Norse and Anglo-Saxon as we finish up the historical tour here, because those will be the closest things to what Tolkien's working off of. So with the Christian stuff, but like these will be the closest. So we're gonna do 3 here real quick because you got the one ready, right? Or something you can talk about the one. All right. So so we'll talk about Thor and his dragon, or his is more of a sea monster, but we'll talk about it real quick. Then we'll do Beowulf, and then we've already kind of talked about Sigurd in the chapter where Bilbo and Smaug talked, but we'll do that story again, and maybe a little bit more so. And then from
I want to hear more about Sigurd, because I have a feeling that because of English class and popular culture, people probably have more familiarity with Beowulf and Thor, but not with Sigurd.
Yeah, and so like Thor and Beowulf we're going to do kind of quick, because Thor, I don't know, well, you'll see, whatever. Beowulf, everybody, should have some familiarity with, and we're going to dive into him at some point in Lord of the Rings really well, too. So, yeah, and then after that, we'll relate this back to other dragons that Tolkien has, then we'll get it back up to Smaug, and then we'll talk a little bit more just about Tolkien and dragons in total. If you're wondering when this episode is going to end. So we're already so deep. All right, but anyways, so Thor fights this. They're in a couple stories where he fights this sea monster Jormungandr, and it kind of sounds like the Leviathan sea monster that causes all the waves and everything. Like it makes like whirlpools and stuff. And like Thor, I think Thor was. I'm saying this part from memory, but I think he was like fishing one day and he like caught it. Like I just imagine like sticking the rod, with the line, but he catches it and then he like throws it back into the sea. He's like, I'll deal with you later. And so with the Norse mythology, so the ultimate final thing that's going to happen is all these gods, like, so we're talking like Thor and Odin and, Loki, he's actually going to be on the bad guys team for it, but like they're all going to fight in this thing called Ragnarok, which is the twilight of the gods, and it's just like it's the coolest sound. Like the concept of it's just so cool. But anyways, the good guys are gonna lose. They know they're gonna lose, so they put off Ragnarok as long as they can, and then they fight the good fight once it comes. Sadly, we're not going to talk about Ragnarok today. I think I got a spot where we can talk about it in Lord of the Rings.
Okay. I'm excited.
But yeah, hopefully we'll return to it. But anyways, in that battle, Thor's fated to fight Jormungandr, who's known as like the Midgard serpent, who's like the sea monster. But I think he can come out of the sea, and I assume he comes out of the sea to see this. So, anyways, he fights that, and so I just got a little clip here. So we'll just play that just for this. It's like I don't know. It's like a minute or two. So get ready to listen to this.
The serpent's mighty coils crush men and horses and armour as it wreaks havoc among the forces of Asgard. Deadly venom drips from its cavernous maw, and thousands die screaming and in terror before its terrifying onslaught. Thor is ready to die, as he has always lived, without tasting fear. Knowing that his hour is at hand, the thunder god begins to sing his death song, a roaring, mournful dirge, as he swings the Mjolnir two-handed above his head. He swings the hammer so fast it begins to glow and hum, its head crackling with energy. The serpent rears up, fold upon fold towering above the god, and opens its great jaws to consume him. With a mighty roar of defiance, Thor leaps at the monster as thunder crashes and lightning rips the skies. He brings the hammer down with a deafening boom on the serpent's skull, and Jormungandr's head literally explodes, splashing the battling warriors around it with its deadly venom. It drops to the floor dead, with a crash that shakes the heavens. The thunder god, his great task done, his fatal nemesis destroyed, and all his energy spent, steps back from the fallen monster, and takes 9 steps before collapsing dead himself, poisoned by its terrible venom.
Oh.
Following the deaths of
Pretty epic.
So that's how Thor dies at Ragnarok. I love that video. Look up Tales of the Norse Legends on YouTube. It's like a 2-hour, 30-minute video. So good. The whole last 10 minutes is like how all the gods die at Ragnarok, and like all of it's that epic. It's sweet. But yeah, so we'll actually return to that in a little bit. But let's just keep moving on.
So
what do you got for Beowulf?
I'll point out first at the beginning of the story. I think, if I'm remembering correctly, Beowulf actually sets out a swim race with one of his kind of relations or friends, Brekka, and they swim.
Yeah.
I believe they're set in what's modern day Denmark, so they're swimming in the North Sea in full armor, apparently, with their swords. A swim race that lasts like multiple days, and the armor is to protect them from sea monsters. And along the way, Beowulf slays 9 sea monsters during this swim race. So it's kind of like this completely epic, preposterous story that's like basically proving Beowulf's strength. So he's just casually... They don't call these dragons, mind you, but I mentioned it because what you were talking about for Thor fighting Jormungandr is like, that's kind of a sea monster dragon.
Yeah. That
this sea monster thing is recurrent. But the key dragon in Beowulf is at the very end. Most of Beowulf builds up to Beowulf going to slay Grendel, which is like the weird monster.
No. Grendel's at the beginning.
Well, I know, but like I feel like the bulk of the book is like.
No, I want the dragon at the end, buddy.
Yeah, I know. I'm saying the bulk of it is like Grendel, and then at the end, after he kills Grendel,
well, we only care about we only care about the dragon. You don't have to do the whole book. Like,
okay, well, I was just giving people a little background. So,
okay, fine.
There's a monster at the beginning. Beowulf's king for a long time, and then there's a local dragon who's been kind of casually asleep, minding its own business. Someone steals something, a cup, a chalice, from its treasure lair.
Kind of like
Bilbo.
Bilbo.
Goes nuts. Yeah, well, we'll get to that in a second, Patrick. Don't worry.
Okay.
The dragon goes nuts, attacks the neighboring village with fire and fury. Apparently, this is the first documented use or description of the dragon breathing fire, which is pretty interesting. I found that interesting because it's not that early. And now we think of that as like a pretty standard feature of dragons is that they breathe fire. But apparently
that's 400s or 500s.
Yeah. Well, yes, that's true. That's true. But this was apparently the first place, so that's cool.
Okay.
And
the first. First we have.
Yes, first we have.
Yeah.
Beowulf says, "Okay, I've got to put a stop to this." He leads some of his soldiers or his guards, what have you, up into the mountain to fight the dragon. Most of them flee. Only one stays with him. That's, what's his name? Wiglaf. So Beowulf and Wiglaf fight the dragon. Beowulf incidentally receives a fatal wound. Wiglaf stabs the dragon in the belly, which actually reduces how much it can breathe fire, and then Beowulf kills the dragon. Oh. So, and then Beowulf, meanwhile, is dying, and he names Wiglaf as his heir, and of the heir of the treasure that the dragon left behind. So, first of all, interesting that both Thor and Beowulf die fighting dragons, I'd point out.
Yeah.
And then, I think we see a lot of parallels between Beowulf and The Hobbit. Probably the most direct parallel or reference that we've seen so far. Like, you've got a dragon hanging out in a lair with a giant treasure who's triggered by someone taking just one single piece of that treasure.
Both times it's a cup, too.
Yeah.
A golden cup.
Dragon goes on a rampage, theoretically killing people other than the person who disturbed the lair in the first place.
So, well, when we say parallels, in this case, this is like, yes, this was Tolkien's inspiration for it, you know? So he's using these elements, like, into his story. And, you know, like, that was, as we've kind of been reading the whole book, you know, especially your first read through, you're just like, man, how is Bilbo ever going to kill this dragon? You know, or, like, how is this dragon going to get killed? Like, you know, how are we going to do this? Well, that was a problem for Tolkien, too. Like, these are, like, his main examples that he can work off of. But, you know, Bilbo's a burglar. He's not a warrior like Beowulf and Thor who can, you know, just kill him. Plus, you know, those two die, too. So it's like, oh, that would be kind of lame. You know, if Bilbo dies trying to kill this dragon. So Tolkien's constantly trying to figure out how to work this out. And we're not actually going to get to how he does it in this episode. We'll get to it once we get to it in the book. But you know, the closest one, as we said before, and we're going to go over the story right now again, it was Sigurd and Fafnir.
Okay.
All right.
And remind me, this is from Saga of the Volsungs?
Yeah, Sigurd. I don't know which story I read, but I read like 3 stories of this, or 3 versions of this story just to make sure. I think the most famous thing's in the Edda.
Okay.
And then, but you know, Sigurd keeps saying he is a Volsung, so I think that's the same thing.
I'm pretty sure, like, there's a whole series of Norse sagas, of which one of them is the Saga of the Volsungs, and the Edda is like a tome that kind of encompasses everything. So it includes what Sigurd is up to.
Volsungs is like a mini book in it.
I think so, and I don't want to misspeak for any of the Norse literature experts out there.
I know. Like, this is so embarrassing of us.
I know.
that we're not ready on this one. All right, so anyways, here's the story, though. So, just whatever happened before. But we're at the point where Sigurd's going to kill this dragon Fafnir. And so then, in one of those stories I was reading, I like this one, it said Sigurd was digging a bunch of tunnels, and he was running in between them. And I imagine, like, the gopher in Caddyshack, you know, messing with Bill Murray. So some say he only dug. I think like some stories they don't get all into it, like he's digging a bunch of series of tunnels and everything. They just say like he digs a hole or a ditch. So there's a hole or a ditch. Like that's the key here, because then Fafnir the dragon's like pulling himself across the hole, or like walking across the hole, and so Sigurd's down there, and so then Sigurd goes up and stabs the belly of the dragon. That's the ultimate blow that's going to kill the dragon, but Fafnir dies slowly. So all the stories like agree on that point.
Okay.
And so then Fafnir's sitting there dying, and he asks Sigurd who he is. But then, and we've gone over this before, but Sigurd refuses to answer because he knows that a dying dragon can curse you.
Ooh.
So he knows that. So it's just like he knows it, and like the story's just taken for granted. Like, yeah, a dragon can put a curse on you at the end. You know, it's like Tolkien does that to us all the time. So here's like a real example of when that was happening, I guess. You know, so Sigurd's like smart. Like, no, I'm not going to tell you my name. But then he stupidly does, and he does it because he's like full of pride, basically. Because basically Fafnir's like, well, you know, when I die, you know, who am I supposed to when I'm in the afterlife, and everybody's asking me like, oh, how'd you die? Who killed you? You know, then I can't give, you know, glory to your name and say who it is. And Sigurd's like, oh, I do want him to actually know. So he tells him his name. So it's just like, dude, you're a moron.
Yeah.
I mean, this is your own fault if you're going to get that.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, and so then Fafnir's just like, yeah, well, you know, all this treasure that I've been guarding, you know, it's yours now, but, you know, you're not going to enjoy it. This is going to be a curse to you. And again, that's like kind of, we're already starting to see the seeds of that where we're at in The Hobbit. Like when the dwarves were going in there, they were pretty obsessed with that gold instantly, even though there could have been a dragon lurking anywhere.
Right.
Yeah, and Fafnir, you know, he also starts going off about how the others who, like, basically talk Sigurd into going on this mission to kill him, you know, they're going to be gunning for the treasure too, and they're going to betray him. Which, if we remember when Smaug was talking to Bilbo, he was sowing seeds of
discontent.
Discontent. Like Bilbo's going to be betrayed by the dwarves because, like, the dwarves are like, you know, how are you supposed to get your share back home to Bag End, Bilbo? I mean, this is ridiculous. Like, what were they promising you or whatever? So again, that was like the little bit of the story. One of the resources I was reading, they were saying Fafnir was originally a dwarf, but through his greed and treachery, he turned into a fearsome, almost indestructible monster who slept on a hoard of gold. Fafnir exhibits one of the most frightening characteristics of dragons. Dragons are not only big, powerful, and hard to kill, many of them are also highly intelligent. So I think that's probably new to Norse mythology. Like, I don't think we've seen that anywhere else, that dragons are super intelligent. Like in Christianity, they're kind of just a monster, and they're a symbol of ultimate evil. But like, I don't think any of them were, intelligent.
No, that is an interesting twist.
And you know, it seems like they're just elemental spirits out in China.
Yeah, maybe kind of wise, but in an abstract way. One thing here, you probably know a little bit more about this than I do, but with a lot of the like Germanic and Norse stories I know, and the Anglo-Saxon ones, it's an interesting blend of kind of older pagan stories being like very selectively mixed with Christianity or being retold by Christian scholars throughout most of Europe. So a lot of these stories have like some blending or some undertones of Christianity, even if they appear to be fully pre-Christian. So I would be curious if the intelligence of the dragon is like coincides with any like representations or stories of Satan as like kind of like witty temptation versus like maybe the more pure militaristic outlook that they had during the Crusades, when they were like thinking about battle and conversion and you know, slaying evil.
You know, I mean, I think it's like super murky to tell, and you know, there's like, I mean, professors spend whole careers trying to decipher what part's what, like what Christian influence might be there, but
because they haven't listened to our podcasts.
No, I don't think we've read their work enough, or at all. But it's important to note, though, like the Norse didn't believe in a devil, so like as like the Christians do. Right. So it's not like dragons. To dragons for them, there was another good thing that I took out of here. Dragons like Fafnir can sometimes represent spiritual corruption or a darker side of human nature. Most of all, dragons embody the destructive phase of the creation-destruction cycle, that's kind of close to like the dualism yin and yang. They never overcome each other.
Right.
Yeah. But this means that they represent chaos and cataclysm, but also change and renewal.
Interesting.
So, that almost sounds closer to Eastern tradition than
certainly.
the hard-cut good evil of Christian.
Yeah, and like the
dragons.
cyclical nature. Yeah, certainly.
But like what you're saying, there's all of these Norse stories, they're preserved probably by some sort of monk at some point. So like and sometimes they probably did write in like a Christian sway to it.
Right. So a key thing here is the temptation. That I find that pretty interesting. Another little bit that you mentioned, that totally surprises me, that Fafnir was a dwarf and through his treachery turned into a dragon. That gives me a whole new understanding of The Hobbit.
I know. I don't even want to. Actually, that's kind of interesting.
It's like, what if the stories in The Hobbit are just like kind of symbolic allegories, and Smaug is actually like a representation of like a dwarf gone wrong, like totally overcome by
or what if like
obsession with treasure.
What if Thorin turns into a dragon here, and that's the real dragon? Like Smaug's just like cupcakes compared to Thorin.
Yeah, maybe. It's like
maybe we should have wrote the Hobbit, Clifford.
I did want to clarify real quick for the Norse literature fans among us. We were mostly correct. Saga of the Volsungs is basically a story that was put together after the fact based on writing from the Edda. So it's not exactly a book of the Edda or like a part of the Edda, chapter of the Edda, but it's pulled from the Edda's like the full story, and then someone did a special release hundreds of years later of just that saga with a little bit of embellishment around the edges.
Right on.
Okay, anyways.
So I'm thinking from the Fafnir Sigurd story, though there's lots of elements like that in The Hobbit, there's probably even more so elements in Smaug's Tolkien's most famous dragon story, but the most famous dragon story that's in the Silmarillion. So, you know how I love to dive into the book. I thought this would be a good time to talk about it.
Certainly.
So, we're about to talk about Turin, the story of Turin, but we're mostly only going to focus on the Glaurung parts of it, and Glaurung's going to be the dragon in it. But there's a reason that we're not going to do the whole story. It's very long. It's also just extremely depressing. I don't know. You're gonna feel parts of the depression as I tell the story, or parts of the story, but like it's even worse than everything else. Okay. So anyways, Turin's the son of our main character is Turin, and he's a man, and he lives out in doesn't matter where he lives, it's not important. Yeah, so he's the son of this really great warrior named Hurin. So Turin, son of Hurin. Okay. So his dad was lost at the Battle of Unnumbered Tears. So, we're starting off the depressing story with a big battle called the Battle. Yeah. So in reality, though, his dad, Hurin, was actually the only survivor of the battle, and he was captured by Morgoth. We all remember who Morgoth is by now, right?
Certainly.
He's the ultimate bad guy there, you know. And he's living up north. And at this point, Morgoth has the three Silmarils. And, he's like stuff like the good guys had kept him under siege for a long time. But this was like where Morgoth's really breaking back out and taking the upper hand again. And, he has this big victory at the Battle of Unnumbered Tears. Right. And but some of the good guys got away. And so he captures Hurin and interrogates him, trying to figure out, like, all right, well, tell me where these good guys are. And Hurin, who's a really good guy, he's just, like, and very valiant and super mighty, he's just like, nah, I'm not going to tell you. Like, no. You can't get anything out of me. And so Morgoth's just like, all right, you know what? You can't, but you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to curse your kids, and I'm going to give you the vision that you're going to watch their whole lives, and you're going to see how cursed they are, all because of me. And you're going to hate it. So that's what happens. So Turin ends up being fostered by Thingol. Do we remember who Thingol is?
Thingol is related to Fëanor?
Nah. He's the one that... Dude, you could just read it. I gave you the notes.
Oh. Thingol gets the Silmaril. he's the one who ends up at the Cimmeral after the whole show with Fëanor's kids. Is that correct?
Well, he's the one that gets killed by the dwarves. He has the Silmaril, and then the dwarves kill him. You remember that story?
But that's after Fëanor's offspring have recaptured the Cimmerils and then lost them?
Different. No,
Okay.
it's before that.
All right.
Yeah. All right. We successfully confused everybody. I'm going to have to chop that up somehow. All right, so anyways. Turin's fostered by Thingol, who's the guy that was murdered by the dwarves when he has the Silmaril. But this is before he's murdered, obviously. But Thingol does have the Silmaril already at this point. So Turin went there because where his homeland wasn't safe, but his mom couldn't go with him because she was pregnant with his sister. And so he never meets his sister. So anyways, things always turn out bad for Turin. Quarrels always break out. Friends die. His plans always fall through. The story, you quickly see the story. And the story, it's so depressing, but it's based off another myth. So it's not like Tolkien had a super emo phase and he decided to write this thing. It was lots of this comes from something else. And maybe when we do a full treatment of the Turin story, we'll get into that if we ever do. I don't know if we will. But yeah. So anyways, the story though, it kind of rides the line between being cursed, like when Morgoth cursed Hurin's kids, versus, sometimes Turin is just really impulsive and makes terrible, stupid, bad decisions. And, that's what causes all his bad luck. Or is it the curse, or is it him just being dumb? And ultimately, both are to blame, usually, is the bummer part. After tons of adventures, mostly sad endings, Turin ends up at a hidden city of elves called Nargothrond. Okay. So, if you remember way back, we had already talked about the hidden city of Gondolin. This one's the second coolest to that.
Okay.
But it's not as cool. It's not as cool. It's not as
okay.
cool.
Okay.
It's not as good. All right. So, anyways, but yeah, so it's one of those hidden cities. So their strength is in secrecy. But Turin's there, and I'm saying Turin, but you probably would pronounce it Turin or something like that. But Turin's there, and he's a pretty aggressive and he's a pretty confrontational guy. So he persuades all the elves, and he basically becomes the military commander of this place because he's the best warrior. He persuades the people to just make the stronghold known and have an open war policy. And so he wins the hearts of the people to do that. They do it, and all the lands around them actually get cleared out pretty well of the orcs. So they have some success. But their location's found out, so then Morgoth sends a huge army of goblins, led by Glaurung, who's the Father of Dragons. So
sounds pretty epic.
Yeah, so this is the first big, huge dragon. This is
Is he literally the father of all the other dragons?
No, he's just the first one. He's
okay.
He's just the first. Yeah,
okay.
The prototype, but the ultimate,
Okay.
And all dragons would look up to Glaurung. So anyways, Turin goes into open battle with them, just on a plain somewhere, and his forces are defeated, but Turin lives because he's got some crazy dwarf armor that's really good at repelling dragon fire. All the other elves die, and he's he must be laying out on the field because the dragon and his army beat him back to Nargothrond. But eventually Turin gets back there. So he runs back to Nargothrond, where the dragon's army is already plundering the city and taking slaves of the remaining elves that are there, including the elf that Turin was in love with.
Oh. Always motivation to go killing some dragons.
Yeah. So anyways, Turin gets there, and then this is what happens. So Glaurung's sitting out front, and then Turin shows up, he's aggressive, confrontational, it's not stealth is his best trait. Right. And so, Glaurung spots him immediately, and so here's how it goes. This is from the book. I cut out a couple sentences, but here's the deal. Hail, son of Hurin, well met. Glaurung opened his serpent eyes and gazed upon Turin. Without fear, Turin looked into them as he raised up his sword, and straightway he fell under the binding spell of the lidless eyes of the dragon, and was halted moveless. Then for a long time he stood as one graven of stone, and the two were alone, silent before the doors of Nargothrond. But Glaurung spoke again, taunting Turin, and he said, Evil have been all thy ways, son of Hurin, thankless fosterling, outlaw, slayer of thy friend, thief of love, usurper of Gondolin, captain foolhardy, and deserter of thy kin. As thralls thy mother and thy sister live, in misery and want. Thou art arrayed as a prince, but they go in rags, and for thee they yearn. But thou carest not for that. Glad may thy father be to learn that he had such a son, as learn he shall. And Turin, being under the spell of Glaurung, hearkened to his words, and he saw himself as in a mirror, misshapen by malice, and loathed that which he saw. Alright, so we'll come back to this, like, some details of that scene in a bit. But anyways, Glaurung basically was saying there, he's, like, guilting Turin, like, hey, you abandoned your mom and sister, like, what are you doing? Why don't you go find and save them? So Turin decides, it's like, alright, I can either go save the girlfriend, or I can go save who I know is in trouble, or this dragon's saying my mom and my sister are, like, in trouble back in the homeland, and I can go for them. But, like, that honestly, that's not much to go off of just from, like, the little conversation we've had. But anyways, he falls for it, and he goes back to his homeland to go get his mom and sister. So the girlfriend ends up getting killed.
Nice.
Not nice.
No, it's terrible for him.
Yeah. Then, now, ironically, and this is, like, the kind of irony that just kills you throughout the story, but it happens everywhere. It was actually because of Turin's open war policy, where they cleared out all the orcs from all the land. It was during that small time period that the mom and sister could actually make it in safety from their homeland to Thingol's halls, which is where they thought Turin was, but Turin had run away long ago. And so Turin goes back home, doesn't find him, and then he just ends up, like, being all pissed, and he settles in, like, some other town of men. Meanwhile, his sister Nienor and his mom Morwen are with Thingol, and Thingol's like, yeah, Turin beat it a while ago because there was some, like, adventure that ended badly there that caused it. And so they decide to go look for him. So they had finally tracked down that, yeah, he was the guy that was leading Nargothrond. So they go and check out Nargothrond. And again, there's some adventures there. We got to brush through all these things. But anyways, the dragon's been chilling out on a pile of gold in Nargothrond, the dragon's Glaurung. And he comes out when he sees that there's this investigating, kind of just like a search party for Turin. And so he comes out, causes a bunch of chaos and everything. And then it comes down to Turin's sister, Nienor. She ends up getting all lost, but then she finds her way to the top of this hill. And so then here's part of the book here. So this is her encounter with the dragon Glaurung. But Nienor, being thrown by her steed, yet unhurt, made her way back, and came thus above the reek into the sunlight. And looking westward, she stared straight into the eyes of Glaurung, whose head lay on the hilltop. Her will strove with him for a while, but he put forth his power, and having learned who she was, he constrained her gaze into his eyes. And he laid a spell of utter darkness and forgetfulness upon her, so that she could remember nothing that ever befell her, nor her own name, nor the name of any other thing.
This is Turin's sister?
Yeah. And so from there, she just kind of like wanders aimlessly, like lost and everything. And then who would find her? None other than Turin himself.
What?
So this is the first time that... Yeah, it's the first time they've ever met. So Turin doesn't know who she is.
Because he left when he was a kid?
Yeah, but the mom didn't go with him because she was pregnant with this daughter.
Oh, okay. So unknown sister meets her for the first time?
Right, and the sister's... Yeah, and the sister's memory is wiped, and so she doesn't know anything. Right, so they end up falling in love, and they get married, which is like, this is such, like, telling you, depressing story here.
Classic
like,
mythology.
Yeah, seriously. Again, this is based off like an actual mythological tale. It's called the Story of Coluvero. Yeah, look it up if you're really into this.
Okay.
Right, but yeah. Anyways, they're living in this town of men, and now things are like finally going good. Like Turin's never had it better, which then again, that's not really saying much for his life. But but things are actually kind of good. And then Glaurung's getting bored in Nargothrond, so he comes to attack the town. So he's going to attack this town of men, and Turin, again, he's like the big, aggressive, confrontational. He's kind of charismatic, too. He ends up being the leader of this town, probably because he's just the most proven warrior again. So he's just like, all right, here's the dragons coming. So he's like, all right, we got to kill this thing. Like, let's do it. So he asks for recruits. He gets like 2. So it's 2 of them, and they're going to go face Glaurung. And he knows that this is Glaurung, who he's already met in Nargothrond and everything like that. So how they're going to do it? How is Tolkien going to do it? We go back to the Sigurd and Fafnir story. So first of all, one of the guys chickens out. So it's Turin and one other guy, which is kind of like the Beowulf story, like 2 guys going at it, right?
Yeah.
Because Beowulf had that Winlaugh friend. Yeah. So
Wiggle off.
they're going at it. Yeah, and so Glaurung, you have to. This is also something like you just might not notice. Glaurung doesn't have wings, so like winged dragons don't come in until later in the Silmarillion.
Okay.
Like it's pretty epic. Like their appearance is like a big deal.
Okay.
He's super big, but he doesn't have wings, and so there's this river that he has to cross, and there's this huge gorge at this one part. So what Turin and this other guy do is they climb down the gorge, and then they're gonna climb up the other side. And Glaurung, I don't know why a dragon would do this, but he's just kind of chilling, taking his way across, and then he's just like sitting on top of the gorge. So like half of him's on one side, half of him's on the other, and then he's like, parts planked in the middle.
It's just like slinking across the landscape like a giant snake.
No, but he's like sleeping. So like I don't know if he likes like the breeze of the water, the waves below him on his belly. Okay. I don't know. Anyways, that's their deal, is they're gonna do that. so they're climbing up. So they climb up, and it's like, again, this is a good adventure. There's like boulders falling, and so Turin's companion actually gets killed by a boulder. But anyways, Turin climbs up, gets to the underside of the belly, and stabs Glaurung. And Glaurung like just jumps up with pain, falls off to the other, like rolls over to one side of the cliff. And so then Turin gets up there, and he's just like starts to kind of boast because he's impulsive and sometimes makes bad decisions. And he's just looking at the dragon. He's like, "Haha, well met, Glaurung. Like look who's here. You remember me? And then Turin goes to pull out the sword, but the black venom of Glaurung spurts out and burns him.
Okay.
Which that might be a nod to the Thor story, because Thor dies because it's the venom of the dragon that's spewed all over him. Yeah. But anyways, there's a line here. And thereupon Glaurung opened his eyes and looked upon Turin with such malice that it smote him as a blow. And by that stroke and the anguish of the venom, he fell into a dark swoon. So the combination of Glaurung, basically, what's the word for like looking him down?
Giving him the evil eye?
Yeah. So the combination of Glaurung giving him the evil eye and the venom like burning his body makes knocks Turin out, and he's just like falls apart. So
but he's not
Nianor's
dead.
like, right. But Nianor's like, whoa, where's my husband? Like, what's up? And so she goes, and she's pretty brave herself, and she's like, she can see from far away that the dragon's dying or is dead. So she goes up there, she finds Turin, and so she starts to wrap him. And so Glaurung's like in and out because he's like dying, just like how Fafnir was slowly dying. And so like on his last time that he like was conscious, he sees Nianor like helping Turin there, and he says, "Hail, Nianor, daughter of Hurin. We meet again ere the end. I give thee joy that thou hast found thy brother at last, and now thou shalt know him, a stabber in dark, treacherous to foes, faithless to friends, and a curse unto his kin. Turin, son of Hurin. But worst of all his deeds thou shalt feel in thyself." Then Glaurung died, and the veil of his malice was taken from her, and she remembered all things, and she remembered all the days of her life. So once the dragon died, she got all her memory back.
Okay.
The story ends shortly after that. No need to go into that now.
Okay.
but like, let's kind of focus on Glaurung here.
Okay, so we were saying we wanted to get back to kind of his basically his enchantment.
Yeah, because like, so here it seemed like there was a definite spell, and it seemed like it was connected. For everything that I was just reading, it seemed like it was connected with his eyes. Like when he like
looking at him.
Yeah, when he locked onto you and you locked onto him, you were in his trance, and he could do like an actual curse spell kind of thing.
Which is something associated with snakes through a lot of stories.
Yeah, I think so. Right? Yeah. But I mean, I don't think that's anything that we saw in any of the Norse stories spelled out directly. Like Fafnir, if anything, it was backwards with Fafnir, because it said Fafnir could put a curse on you as he died, whereas here Glaurung put a curse, like a complete mind-wiping curse on Nianor, but once he died, then the curse was broken, so it was almost reversed.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, like, Turin was frozen when he saw him outside of Nargothrond and just had to listen to him. And then at the end, it wasn't just the venom that knocked Turin out, it was him giving him the evil eye to stare him down. And then, Nianor's, that was obvious that she was like, her memory was wiped because of him. Mm-hmm. So there's some power there. But then also, I'd also say too, and I don't think we saw that with Smaug. But then again, the only thing we've seen with Smaug is that he interacts with Bilbo, and Smaug doesn't know where Bilbo is, so like direct eye contact would be extremely hard in that situation. Anyways, so I don't know if Smaug has that power or not, or if that's reserved for just the Father of Dragons. But
correct. Although Bilbo does talk about looking into Smaug's eyes, seeing the light from his belly. There is a visual part of it for Bilbo, and perhaps maybe that we could see that as like maybe part protection for Bilbo, because Smaug can't see him. That gives him a level of removal that kind of helps him resist the enchantment of Smaug.
Yeah, and then I'd say too, both the dragons, whether they could put an actual spell on you or not, they both have such a charismatic, dominant personality. Mm-hmm. It's so persuasive, like he basically witted Turin into going all the way to his homeland to save a supposedly in trouble mom and daughter, as opposed to the girlfriend that she knows in trouble right in front of you.
Right. It's also interesting that it's not like he just destroys him or kills him by looking at him or something like that, or like, something like that. But it's the curse. He's able to like throw him off with the enchantment. And
of course we know how dominating Smaug was, like with his personality.
Right.
and both of that goes back to the Norse comment about intelligent dragons.
Mm-hmm. This makes me think of what we mentioned briefly at the beginning of the episode, to kind of bring it full circle with our initial discussion about fear and dragons being a kind of a symbolism or a projection of our very primal, direct fears of natural monsters into one kind of super figure. On the flip side of that, there's something very, very relatable and personal about voices, particularly like if we understand them and they talk to us. It helps break down the foreignness and the kind of weirdness for us. So at the beginning I mentioned the example of, I think this came up because I was reading about the ethics of artificial intelligence and like where people start to draw the line for like, do robots have rights? Do you think that's a preposterous idea? Do you feel bad like turning off a vacuum robot permanently or something like that? Like where do you make a distinction between the robot as a thing and having some sort of consciousness or personality?
I'm definitely in the camp. Robots do not have rights.
Okay, yeah. I'm mostly, but in general, what one of these studies was looking at is like basically people have like way more guilt and hesitation killing something that has human features, voice in particular being a very strong one, even if they know it's a robot, like it's a humanoid robot, and they're being asked to like permanently turn it off or decommission it, destroy it somehow, versus killing an ant or a fish or a small reptile, something like basically on the premise that even if we know it's a robot and it's not a human, because it has human characteristics, we are inherently wired to be hesitant about killing that thing or doing it harm. And it has a sort of power over us and a connection to us because of that. And things that are very different from us don't have that. And what is interesting about this to me is almost all these stories across all these different cultures, snakes are kind of one of the dominant things that we see with dragon, or dominant representations of dragons, I should say. Snakes are inherently very different from humans. They're scary, dangerous, venomous. They move, feel, sound, look very different from us. But then, meanwhile, in these stories, Hobbit included, the dragons conversing with our heroes is a very witty, human, clever, dynamic part of the story. So it throws a total wrench in this like very basic distinction between the good guys and bad guys.
It does, yeah. And I think the Sigurd and Fafnir one would have been it was probably the first story, right? Because the dragon and Beowulf doesn't talk. Yeah, the dragon and Beowulf doesn't talk.
I don't believe so, no.
I don't think the Jormungandr guy talks in Thor, even though he could be like divine. I'm not sure. Yeah, so that's not even like it was just like a Tolkien touch. Like Tolkien was the first person to have talking dragons either.
Right. Yeah, we don't have to go into the ethics of AI.
I think we should talk about though, like just the dragons being able to talk.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do we humanize them more as opposed to like the snake? I thought that's where you're going with it.
Certainly, yeah. I mean, that's exactly what I mean. Is like simply the fact that they have a voice that we understand makes it that much harder for us to resist whatever they're saying and to think of them as something other, something very bad that we're fighting.
But I think, well, I kind of also think too, just to draw on like what we've talked about tonight, at least like the Western Christian predominance that they're always evil kind of plays into it too. So it's not like we want to like buddy up and be best friends with them and get close to them, you know? No,
certainly not. And that's like the scary part of it is that they're like the clever bad guy, right?
Yeah.
They're not a brute necessarily.
The supervillain with an evil lair, you know?
Exactly, but
they actually usually do have an evil lair too, yeah. And then they do. And they're super rich.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a whole nother can of worms. Is like how that dragon myth has like morphed itself into modern stories. I think that's exactly it. It's like the James Bond villain is like has dragon characteristics basically.
Yeah.
But anyways, I can't say that I have a final conclusion on the voice thing.
It's interesting.
I think it's a phenomenal twist. I think it's very smart that it's set up that way, and it's a useful innovation in terms of the types of stories that they're telling. Like it opens the door, I think, onto like a whole lot more character development in general, and like setting up what feel to me to be much more modern stories. Like I think something like a big distinction that we feel when reading some of these old myths versus reading modern stories is that things tend to be very cut and dry in the old myths. Like the stories themselves might be crazy, but there's relatively little character development even for the main characters. Whereas now we kind of expect that we're getting into the head and understanding the personal struggles of all of the characters.
I think that also goes back to like what we were talking about with the St. George myth. Like it's filtered down to just like the bare bones essentials. So
True.
Like, you know, the character development, it's like, well, maybe they didn't actually care about that the way we do now today.
Right.
And like we want like a well-crafted TV show story with
right.
like
exactly
characters changing everything. But like, yeah, back then it was, you know, just from like a resource standpoint too, and like time being a resource, materials, education, you know, you got the bare bone thing that entertained people and what people needed to hear, or like symbolized for.
Right, you got just the plot.
In just the basic stories.
Yeah,
you know?
Certainly. I guess, yeah, this like the transition of kind of weaving in something as weird as a talking dragon is a step away from that, which I like and I think is an important thing, where you get like you get a more dynamic villain, or more interesting villain, because they're just as smart or smarter than the good guys.
Yeah, and that's kind of been a bit of a conversation we've had throughout The Hobbit, like the modern versus the ancient epic heroic stuff. Like Bilbo's like the more modern character. So
exactly.
It's like, this was like you were saying, an unexpected twist of another one for us with the dragon, which yeah, that helps us. I get what you're saying. That helps us relate more to the story too.
So I have to ask, speaking of the ethics of robots and voices being relatable, do we think, like, what does this hold for looking forward in The Hobbit? Do you think that Bilbo is going to feel some remorse or some connection to Smaug, or there's going to be like some weird twist, kind of in vain with some of these myths? As I'm jumping to conclusions, but predicting that Smaug is going to be killed somehow. What are your thoughts? looking forward, or you're like, no, I can't make any predictions.
Well, yeah, it's hard for me to make a prediction when I've read the book multiple times before.
Personally, after hearing some of these myths and forgetting what I've read of The Hobbit before, it feels like it's setting up for something that we don't expect. Like the basic dragon narrative is like, we have a dragon, we have a hero, which is maybe Bilbo, but maybe somebody else who's going to kill the dragon, but in that process, there's going to be like a tragedy or a twist or a conflicted decision or something like that. And that's just what I'm suspecting. I don't really know what it is.
Well, if you're going to kill a dragon, like we can say this too. If you're going to kill a dragon, that's a pretty heroic warrior-like thing to do.
Right.
And ultimately what? Bilbo's the burglar because warriors and heroes are busy. Mm-hmm. So,
True.
I think a twist is going to have to be involved.
Okay, well, I'll keep that in mind.
Yeah. I got one last question, though, is we talked about where, like, a fear of dragon can come from. We've talked about what dragons represent in all parts of the world here. But, like, when we get down to it, and we've seen Tolkien's own examples himself, but what do dragons represent to Tolkien?
Certainly bad things, but I don't know about pure evil. Smaug, like, I felt like the goblins and Tolkien's depiction of goblins felt a little bit more like he was trying to describe the evil in the world is characterized by goblins. Whereas Smaug is like a rogue character. He came out of nowhere.
Selfish. He's like a selfish evil.
Yeah, exactly.
Not like the root of all evil, but he's just
not calculating.
Yeah.
He's in it for the treasure and the occasional bit of chaos and destruction.
Yeah, he's very cunning. I think is like for Smaug and Glaurung.
Cunning, but he's a lone wolf, right?
Well, he's all interested in himself. Right. I'm sure if he sees like a good opportunity to cut a deal with somebody where he could profit himself, he would do it.
Okay.
But that's more so Smaug. We can use Smaug and I guess what we talked with Glaurung for Tolkien. But yeah, so you're thinking dragons for him are what? Not the purest evil, but
yeah, certainly dangerous and powerful and evil, but not cut and dry like the darkness in the world type thing.
Yeah,
like
so it's
the
not
dragon
like
is not Morgoth.
Yeah, I agree. It's not like Satan in the Bible,
and it's very specifically tied to wealth.
Yeah,
and corruption as a part of that, like this sort of enchantment,
greed.
Yes, certainly. So in The Hobbit, it seems like a very clear way to hammer the point home about dragon sickness or greed to his children and to anyone reading the story. Glaurung, I don't know. I guess it's kind of cool to have like a semi-rogue character, even though he's like theoretically the head of the army for the bad guys. He's a little bit he's functioning like kind of independently as well.
Yeah, it's almost like he's like contracted or something.
Right. He's like a mercenary.
Yeah, but I mean, he's still under the authority, but yeah, he just. Yeah, he gets his own freedom. Because like Glaurung, he took the army and then he just kind of sat on treasure for a couple not a couple decks, probably like a couple years, and just didn't do anything. Which is, I don't know if that was in the game plan when Morgoth sent him out, but Morgoth was probably cool with it and was like, all right, this is fine, I guess. But dragons will be dragons. I don't know. Yeah. Well, that's kind of interesting that. Because Tolkien obviously, I don't think he would have been influenced by the Chinese stuff, just straight up. But he was definitely influenced by his writing was heavily influenced by the Norse stuff, and he would have known all the Christian stuff too. But it seems like he's bowing towards that Norse because like in Norse stuff they were just highly intelligent and chaotic, as opposed to root of all evil.
Yeah, so I guess you could say he's blurring that together a little bit, but it certainly feels more in the Norse basis.
It feels like we're definitely not like Smaug's not the evilest of all evil things. He's just the big problem, kind of the current evil thing in the way that we're revolving around. Yeah. Especially for anybody that's read Lord of the Rings, you should get that vibe.
Right.
And you will get that vibe for new people when you read along with us.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
Well, I'd say that covers dragons for the moment.
I think it does. I think that was pretty good.
That was epic.
That was an epic. Yeah. Holy crap.
Have,
All right.
Quite the epic editing to do.
I know, dude. I know. You know, so this was a special, everybody. I don't know if we'll do a special ending, so let's just say something now. You know, thanks for getting through this. If you did, yeah, you're a real champ or a trooper.
Yes.
Yeah. So thanks for that. You know, we got the last couple episodes of The Hobbit coming. Maybe this would be a good time to say that, just forewarning, I'm working heavily, as fast as I'm working hard on Lord of the Rings notes. But there's going to be a gap in between those shows. But, you know, we want the whole thing to go smoothly and not, like, skip weeks. So we're just going to have, like, kind of like an off period in between the shows. But, you know, once we get the Lord of the Rings stuff set up, we should kind of be good for almost, like, all 3 books, hopefully. But, yeah.
Exciting.
You know, we always welcome feedback, too. Give us suggestions if you want us to talk about stuff more or go more in depth. Just let us know if you like a special like this. I kind of like doing it. I don't know. Might be too much work, but maybe I don't think we'll ever do something as big as this again. But you know, another special. We could. I got ideas for other specials we could do.
Okay.
So, yeah. All right. Well, why don't we leave it there?
Yep.
All right. Have a good week, dude.
All right. Yeah. You too.
All right.
That's good. I mean, hit the sack. All right. Thanks, y'all.